Okay, good afternoon. Welcome everyone to the traditional AITA events on the state of Article 6 negotiations. This year's title is What Remains to be Done to Unlock Engagement in 2024. As you know, there has been a landmark agreement 2 years ago at COP26 in Glasgow, and since then the negotiation has been ongoing, increasingly focused on technical and operational details. But there has also been action on the ground to implement Article 6.2 approaches. So we're here at COP28 with a busy agenda for the negotiators, and I'm really grateful that some of them are here in spite of their very, very busy schedule. And we will reflect upon the state of the negotiations and discuss with some other panelists what the expectations are for the private sector and for implementation on the ground. So I'll start briefly introducing the panelists. To my left, Maria Al-Jishi. She's an international policy advisor at the Ministry of Energy in Saudi Arabia. She's a negotiator representing the LMDC in the Article 6 room, and she's also the co-facilitator for the 6.2 text. Then Luis Panicelli, lead Article 6 negotiator for Argentina, also representing the ABU group, an important group constituted by Argentina, Brazil, and Uruguay. Felix Schmidt, policy advisor at the Federal Office for the Environment in Switzerland. Felix has been involved in the implementation of the Swiss 6.2 approach, and this year is also a negotiator in the Article 6 room. Then moving on to the private sector speaker, Lisa DeMarco, senior partner and CEO at Resilient LLP, and also chair of the AITA Council. He's been an observer in the negotiation, sitting around the table for several years. Hannah Homan, global head of carbon trading at Trafigura. And Suraj Vanyarachi, vice president at Macquarie Group. And I am Andrea Bonzani, international policy director at AITA. So we started a bit late, so I'll try to move straight into the substance, starting to ask a question each to the panelists. Starting with Maria, given your extensive involvement in the negotiations, and I forgot to say you're also a member of the Article 6.2 supervisory body, the body that's developing the operational rules of the new crediting mechanism. Can you provide the audience with a lowdown of the state of the Article 6 negotiations and what are the most important outcomes that are needed here in Dubai to move forward next year and go ahead with implementation of Article 6 and market approaches?
Thank you for such a simple question. First, thank you very much for the invitation. I'm very, very happy to be here talking about the state of Article 6. But Article 6 in its entirety, I think in bits and pieces, is in different locations when it comes to implementation. So for 6.4, I'll work backwards. 6.4 mechanism, a lot of the implementation sits with the supervisory body. The most important piece that will really make or break our ability to operationalize that mechanism is the recommendations that are currently under consideration by CMA for both methodologies and removals. And it's tricky because the mandate that came out of COP26 asks the supervisory body to come up with the recommendations, and then they need CMA approval before they can start implementing. And so every time CMA says no, that's another year of delay. And that's another year where a lot of the hooks that exist in all of the other documents that are being prepared by the supervisory body are left in limbo, including project standards and project procedures and everything that's related to that, because it is very closely linked to what is required in both the development of methodologies and what you need to do for the activities that involve removal specifically. And so I'm really hoping that we can get through CMA smoothly, taking note of everyone's concerns, receiving guidance on a way forward, but at least allowing the supervisory body to continue its operation instead of going to the drawing board and reworking the exact same two documents with really very little progress forward. So that's a piece that really is dependent on how the next few weeks are going to go, and it's essential that Dubai secures this decision. For 6.2, and I'll jump right to 6.2 because a lot of the elements that are under discussion are overlapping and linked. For 6.2, parts of it are operationalized with the COP27 decision text, and then parts of it are still being discussed, like the process for authorization. Do you need a specific letter to authorize the cooperative approach? Do you need a letter to authorize the entity? Do you need a letter to authorize the ITMO, or can all of it be done in the exact same process all at once? Is it left up to national arrangements to issue it? Do we need a standardized form for people to be able to use? And I'm sure for the people who, the brave hearts and souls who venture into the Article 6 room and listen to our discussions happening on the ground, we even get into the point where we're discussing common nomenclature to help us populate our reports and what kind of common nomenclature we would be agreeing to. And so we're not exactly the simplest of people. We're very technical and extremely complex, and I fear that we sometimes overcomplicate things because we tend to think in moving pieces, and then everyone thinks differently in different ways, and oftentimes I find that everybody is saying the exact same thing, but in different ways with different moving pieces and different definitions. And so kind of digging in to figure out what it is that everybody is all saying is part of the challenge and the wonder of co-facilitating 6.2. And so I'm excited to see where it goes, but I will say that we need some kind of decision on the infrastructure for Article 6, and we also need a decision on a process for authorization, because we cannot expect project participants to begin investing without clarity on what their investment is going towards, what return on investment they would be expecting, and quite frankly, the price of the credit. Because if it's an ITMO, it should go for a higher price than anything else in the market at this point in time. So I'll stop here. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you for summarize several years of work in a clear 5-minute response. And I'm going to move to Luis with a similar question. Would you like to add or comment on what Maria just said? And also, I know you're involved on the domestic side in Argentina. So can you tell the audience a little bit about what your country is doing on carbon market implementation whilst the negotiations are still ongoing?
Okay. Well, thank you, Andrea, and good afternoon to everybody. Just to complement this very comprehensive overview that Maria just already provided, but maybe trying to go more on the other different elements that we also need to consider under the three parts of the Article 6. No? And we understand that it's not only about emission trading, but also about no-market approaches, where there are also opportunities now for investment for the private sector. No? And this is something that should be also be balanced between the different types of mechanism or instruments that we're implementing under Article 6. Then on 6.2, apart from, we think there are three main elements that need to be, and we hope to have agreed at this COP, and this relates for sure to the authorization issues, an imbalance between what we are authorizing and the contents of the authorizations that we are having in the 6.4 and the 6.2 mechanism. We think this is one of the core issues of the discussion that we have been pushing forward over the years, no, maybe focusing on more technical issues that are still unsolved, no? Basically because it's touched over the possibilities and the responsibilities of the different countries in order to achieve their indices, no, and how they are going to assure that they are complying with the Paris Agreement, no? This is one of the main issues that may be holding parties and countries' implementation and decisions on what to authorize and not authorize, no? Based on the expected future outcomes and the expected implementation of the rare disease, no? And specifically on the possibilities to provide changes or revocations, no? In the cases where countries may be not aligned with NDC or other conditions that can go into the different types of safeguards or violation of human rights, no? Different types of things that our countries are very concerned, no? So maybe this is one of the reasons why Article 6.2 at the beginning had a broad acceptance, and now we see like countries are trying to stepping back, no, until we can have these decisions agree and have clear guidance on what we can authorize at what time, at what point in time, and what are the possibilities of making changes and revocations. No, keeping in mind for sure not implications that this has, no, for the implementation of the of projects, for the investment, and for the private sector. No, so we are trying to strike this balance, no, between providing an environment for implementation of the cooperative approaches, but assuring that countries can also afford and achieve the rare disease, no? And not only first in disease, but also in the long term, thinking also on the long term strategies, no? So this is more or less the perspective on 6.2 and authorization that is touching also on the 6.4. For sure, also the infrastructure and the types of registries is also other issues that we need to address, and also we expect to have a decision here at the SCOP. There are still divergent views of what are the purpose of the registries, no, for the reporting and the accounting under Article 6, or for the transactions, no, that can be implemented under this type of registries, no, and how we are allowing different types of connections of national registries, of 6.4 registries with international registries, and how to assure the consistency in the accounting between these different registries that we will maybe need to be pulling and viewing data and double checking, thinking also on the work of the reviewers, no? Because we think this is one of the main important issues also under Article 6.2, because we don't have a supervisory body, no, that is governing over the structure, no, but we have only the checks by the secretariat, but also the work of the reviewers that will assure the transparency, no, and the consistency of the implementation of the approaches under Article 6.2. So these are mainly the three elements that we see on this. There are other elements on Article 6.4 and mainly related to the availability of methodologies. No? We think this is something that is a must then to allow the implementation and to move forward into developing methodologies, no, that are compatible with the rules, modalities, and procedures for the 6.4, and the removal guidelines where there are still very divergent views and concerns on how to implement this. I recognize the hard work being done by the supervisory body over this year, and the hard time they had during this year to come up with these documents that is very complicated and delicate balance. So this is something that we need to consider also at the scope to try to move implementation also for different types of implementation activities. Then going into the national context, Argentina has just presented our national strategy for the development and use of the carbon markets. It's not only focusing on the Article 6, but is mainly a chapeau for the implementation of different carbon pricing instruments, no? That aligns also with the carbon tax that we have in Argentina, how this connect with possibilities to do domestic emission trading system, things that we are also considering. We are seeing also large potential now for this type of domestic approaches, even considering high quality credits from the 6.4 mechanism as a standard not to be used in the development of carbon markets. And we are thinking also on how to implement Article 6 in their three different kinds of instruments. No? Bearing in mind this need to define the type of additional activities and the type of additionality considerations that we need to consider to approve or authorize activities that go beyond our NDC. No? See, this is mainly, I have a copy here, but you have already also on the web page of our Ministry of Environment, so you can there have a look of how we are thinking about implementing carbon market in the broad sense in Argentina, and we have expectations now to continue this work in the next year to start implementing the strategy for the implementation of carbon markets. So this is my take on this. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Luis. And moving forward to Felix. Luis referred to countries that are holding back. I don't think Switzerland is one of them. It has been one of the front runners on implementing Article 6.2. So can you explain to us how Switzerland is going about with this, and whether you expect the ongoing negotiations to impact your future strategy and engagement?
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, Andrea, for the question and the invitation to speak here. As you mentioned, Switzerland has been active in Article 6.2, especially for the last years. Switzerland has to date signed 11 bilateral agreements with partner countries. The first one was even in 2020, so before the Glasgow decisions, and we've continued to sign these bilateral agreements as part of the or as part of the compliance market that we have in our policy setup. So one of the policy instruments in Switzerland refers to CO2 compensation. So most of this is actually done nationally. So we've had a running CO2 compensation mechanism within Switzerland for roughly 10 years. There is a CO2 law in place and an ordinance that specifies many of these things, and a portion of this is now transitioning also into Article 6 activities. So Article 6.2 engagements can be used for compliance of the offset obligation that we have in our national context. And so the bilateral agreements that we've signed so far, they last year at COP we announced the first authorization together with Ghana on the first project, so kind of showcasing that operationalization, whatever that word exactly means, is possible, at least to the extent that we have a national framework in place that is compliant with the CMA decisions so far. And so 2 other projects have followed this year. We have 3 authorized activities in Ghana, Vanuatu, and Thailand for the moment, and are kind of hoping to send the right signals, also the right initial signals of how Article 6 engagement in the host country together with our national framework can be done. So our expectations for the negotiations are really to continue the smooth implementation. As mentioned already by Luis and Maria, they're very technical issues that need further guidance or clarity, and we're mindful of that. To us, the decisions taken definitely should help to help our further implementation of the 6.2 activities and not have hindrances in there. As Luis mentioned as well, I think very similar, the key issues that will be open under Article 6.2. One refers to the registry infrastructure. The views in the room have been quite divergent in the past, I would say. We believe that a transparent and centralized tracking infrastructure for both 6.2 and 6.4 is the way to ensure transparency and integrity of the instruments. So this really is one of the key issues that we look forward to diving into very deeply. And the second one, as was also mentioned, refers to authorization or the different types of authorization. We do see the potential for further clarification and guidance on what authorization and what authorization types really mean. I mean, we have our interpretation of it since we have authorized activities, and so we're keeping this in mind also in the negotiation. What has also been said before, investment security, also for private sector engagement, is key. So the decisions taken both on authorization but also on sequencing, timing, and the review process will be a critical point also regarding investment security. And so, yeah, to wrap up, I mean, 6.2 is operational to some extent. On 6.4, I will not repeat a lot what I said. I agree that the recommendations on methodologies and removals will be key in order to have a 6.4 mechanism where stakeholder engagement is possible. We are mindful, or we also, I mean, thank the supervisory body for their extensive work last year, and believe that on the methodological recommendations, really a good first step and a really solid foundation for our upcoming discussions, especially regarding conservativity of the emission reduction calculations, proof of additionality, both financial and regulatory. These kind of issues are, I think, will hopefully be one of the key outcomes also from this COP. On removals, I also agree there are the recommendations currently are technology neutral, and this is very difficult to do given the big range of nature-based solutions on one side and highly technological solutions on the other. To bridge the gap, also addressing reversal risks in that topic will be key in the upcoming negotiations. So I will leave it at that, and looking forward to the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you. Moving on to Lisa. So we heard from 3 negotiators. At AITA, you are the chair of AITA. At AITA, we advocated Article 6 as a key instrument to achieve the Paris Agreement and increase ambitions. But as I said in my introduction, we haven't seen the level of activity that we were hoping for, at least not up to now. What are, in your view, the key outcomes that need to happen to step up and scale engagement in the short term, as early as next year?
I would classify them as threefold, and they really align with the open issues in both Article 6.2 and Article 6.4. So if we can use an acronym, because we all like acronyms here. ATA, authority, authorizations, transparency. Many of the forms look to facilitate transparency. And finally, accountability. So ATA, new acronym for the crowd. On the authorization piece, there's some confusion or some discussion as to what needs to be authorized. The cooperative approach, the ITMO, the entities participating or authorized to participate in the approach. And how we do that is part of the negotiation. One of the key elements to really facilitate scope and scale of this market, to really help achieve the goals of the Paris Agreement now, prior to 2030, not 7 years from now when we finally get a decision over the line, is to ensure that private sector entities or countries participating in the mechanisms can rely on the authorizations. And so one of the key issues there is in and around revocation. Can you create the authority to participate and then revoke that? What happens to investment if you create a currency and then allow it to be ripped up? That's one of the issues that we really need to solve now in Dubai this year. Secondly, in relation to transparency, lots of issues in relation to regulated participants, parties, regulated entities who want to participate in the Article 6 markets, and knowing precisely what they're buying, who they're buying it from, what are the conditions of its use. Very important. So things like the standard information required in the forms, in the initial report, in the EAF, in the subsequent reporting of that, in the common accounting and reporting platform, in the Article 6 database. Very important. And in particular, in relation to the private sector, participating in those mechanisms, you need to know what you're doing and how you're doing it and what you need to convey to ensure transparently that you've got what you think you've got, and or you can use what you've participated in. Last, in relation to accountability, relates in part to the sequencing and the timing. There are a number of fundamental issues regarding the ultimate demonstration of compliance with the rules and how that's done. The registry piece plays into this. And there's a bit of a disagreement as to where those registries at a national level can link in to the Article 6 system. Is it through the mechanism registry, or is it through the international registry, or are there other mechanisms that can be used to help facilitate the capacity building and the elements of registry formation without requiring a number of countries that don't have full capacity to create one quickly to do so quickly. So these are elements that are quite important, and we are seeing some challenges in relation to the use of nature-based solutions and or qualification of nature-based solutions at a fundamental level and how they integrate with the protocol, either through Article 6, which we strongly believe it does, or through some other mechanisms which some entities are advocating for. So those are key issues that I think we need to see solved in the short term. ATA.
Thank you. Anna, over to you. You're a trader, and you're now active on carbon after being a trader on other commodities. So we all want implementation, but from your perspective, what good implementation looks like? How can we create a real market, a market that is liquid, that has fungible instruments that can be traded? What are the outcomes that can help that, and what are the outcomes that perhaps may hinder market formation?
Thank you for that. So if we think about what the key focus of a trader is, or what value traders bring to the market, it is how do you smooth the natural inefficiencies between global production and global consumption? And with physical commodities, that looks like freight, storage, blending. Within carbon markets, a lot of times it's volume surety, a lot of times it's policy insulation. But at the core of it all is ultimately deployment of finance and risk management to facilitate efficient transactions. So we're trying to smooth global supply and global demand. So then in an Article 6 context, let's first think about supply. If we are thinking about, let's say, the macro layers that are being formed at the moment, so obviously methodologies is a key piece of work that these brave souls hopefully will be deciding over the next couple of weeks. We have items like global infrastructure around the registries and the meta registries, which is being put in place. We have the governance structure, which is being handled by the UNFCCC. In truth, I think we are very optimistic about the macro, again, pending the next few weeks, but where we see a real challenge is actually on the supply side for the micro. So what is happening at that host country level? So many of the host countries that we are working with on developing projects, we get immediate questions around what does it actually take to participate in these markets? We want to bring in climate finance, but we need to work out what's required from an infrastructure perspective, from an administrative perspective, i.e. simple things. Does this sit with the Ministry of Environment? Does it sit with the Ministry of Trade? The Ministry of Foreign Affairs? These are questions that need to be solved within governments that are dealing with a completely new subject matter and quite frankly are ultimately drawing the rules from scratch. So this extends further when we actually talk about individual project implementation. So we now need letters of approval. We need individual corresponding adjustment concessions for not just the project, but what individual units, what percentage of those units, in which years, revocability aside. But these are, again, more simple administrative processes, but these are very big hurdles for host country governments that, quite frankly, are still working out what their local domestic policy is in terms of how they collect their levies and funds and how they just assign this in terms of operational flows within their ministry. So I think when we're talking about standardization of forms, that is music to my ears, and I know would be hugely music to a lot of the host countries that we work with, of where do we have fallbacks in terms of what can be, let's say, standard accepted nomenclature, standard accepted forms, but then where countries can continue to build upon. But I think a base level of documentation is really, really critical, as it just reduces a bit of that administrative burden from the host country side. So once we have that eligibility, once we have the macro infrastructure, once we have the ability to work with our host countries on investment and development of projects, that really brings us in a tremendous way forward on the supply side. So then what does that actually mean for the demand side? Because this is still a critical piece here. Article 6.4 is creating, I would say, the ground rules for supply. But in reality, it doesn't quite create the ground rules for demand. So what we see in terms of what actually enables commodity markets to scale is where do we have standardization and, let's say, least common denominator deliverables that everyone can agree to, but then where buyers can still have differentiation depending on their areas of prioritization. So funnily enough, we're actually already seeing this in terms of 6.2. Where the rules of Switzerland are vastly different to Sweden, to Singapore. Buyer preferences will continue to be unique in an Article 6 world, and that's a positive thing. But those clear demand signals in terms of which types of projects are valued, that is hugely important from the investor side of, yes, I have the ability to invest and produce, but is there someone who wants this good or service on the other side? And the clearer that demand framework is really supported, the more the market can really scale again from both sides of that equation. So I think the final point on this is, and again, the good news is when we talk about 2024, we already do see in truth the first early markets of Article 6. We have the Singapore import tax beginning next January. Switzerland's been well underway for now some time with the fuel tax imports. And in fact, we actually even have Corsia, all of which rely on this baseline infrastructure of those export approvals, that accounting, and that transparency which is so required. And what gets us very excited about Article 6.2 in particular is, yes, we need 6.4 standardization, lowest common denominator, universal approach, but 6.2 actually enables countries to use this in a very different way. So like what we are seeing with Singapore, 6.2 allows Singapore to now mobilize its private sector to buy and purchase in the Article 6 market on its behalf. And we're seeing this increasingly as governments are looking at designing their regulatory schemes, even on a domestic level, how they can now actually incorporate Article 6 to, again, mobilize their buy-side private sector and really harmonize those challenges of what the corporate is seeking in terms of a price signal for emissions and what the government is seeking in terms of climate finance and equally NDC achievement. So if we're looking for, again, hopefully some very exciting results over the next few weeks, there is a big macro layer that is obviously being negotiated now and put in place. But in truth, I think the devil's in the details on enabling those host countries to participate, to ease what is already a pretty high administrative burden, as I think the enthusiasm is very, very much there. But I think it's having those kind of guardrails to really create that solid supply, create that clarity on what is demanded from these markets, and ultimately enabling capital to flow. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Hannah. And I'm really glad you took some time to describe the Singapore 6.2 approach and the role of the private sector in it. Many say that 6.4 is where the private sector can get involved, whereas 6.2 is only government to government. Well, 6.2 is based on government to government agreement, but then within the specific cooperative approach, there can be a role for the private sector, and we certainly advocate it. So last but not least, Suraj, what are you and Macquarie Group expecting from Article 6 in the near future? What are you focuses on, and to what extent do you think we need more CMA guidance versus just implementation and policy frameworks at the national level?
Yeah, thank you, Andrea. And I'm the last to speak, so there's a lot of have been told. I'll try to do my best. To answer your first question, Andrea, I think I sit in the private sector, so the private sector capital would flow into projects and into countries where there is clarity and there is demand assurance from governments, looking at both sides. And at the moment, if you look at the voluntary market, I believe, according to kind of Trove research, there's over 780 or 790 surplus unretired credits in the voluntary market. So we wouldn't, as a private sector, we'd be careful on understanding how can we deploy our money. So that's a key thing. Number two is, I come from the CDM time, so I used to work with governments on getting the kind of host country approval. So I see now what's happening with the letter of authorization is similar but a bit more advanced, right? So at that time, when the DNAs, the designated national authorities, were issuing the host country approval, they had clear guidance from UNFCCC. So if I compare one country letter to the other, everything had the same guidance. It was very clear. As an investor or a buyer, we didn't doubt that letter. But now I sit in the technical team within the Global Carbon of Macquarie, so I see so much letters coming from different developers, and none of them, they're hardly same. So they would draft, they would work with someone, and that's not helping from the investor sector. So we are very cautious. We really appreciate what other policymakers are taking at international and policy, country level. So I would expect something this year and going forward, how a letter of authorization should be issued. And I know certain countries are really good at it. I mean, some of the government officials are putting their 24/7 working, so that's something we're expecting, number one. And in terms of the second question on the CMA versus, I think when we read, like a few days ago, the 6.2 manual was published, the version 1, I had read it. I mean, it's really a good start. And I think that communication both ways is quite important. We at private sector, we are always looking at what the UNFCCC says and the national governments. I think without saying we need more from CMA, I would say now it's time also for the governments, national governments, to take these back to their countries and work as teams and apply it international levels. And finally, when I look at projects, what we are working on is we're looking at how we as a bank can help countries raise their national ambitions. It doesn't mean that we just put the money and expect it to operate. We'd like to see a burning issue of a country. Water scarcity, or mining, whatever. And then how we can use Article 6 and the carbon offsets to really address that issue. Because that means we are driving the foreign investments into the country. They are raising their ambitions, supporting livelihoods. That's where we are looking at. So I'd stop from that because much have been told on the policy side, and Hannah and we have already discussed. Happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. So since we have such a full room, I'm going to open the floor for a question right away. So please raise your hand. There should be a roving mic available. One there at the back.
Hello, my name is Simon Pfluger from Climate and Company. How do you address in the negotiations the NDC crediting period issue that will end in 2030?
So, who wants to take this? Maybe one of the negotiators first. Felix?
Yes, I can give it a step. So this is referring to NDCs being until 2030, not knowing what is. So in the Swiss context, this just means authorized projects and future authorized projects will only be able to generate credits until the end of 2030 in order to remain NDC compliant. That's maybe the easy answer for private actors. This also means time is kind of running very fast, and we have also, I mean, we have a national setup in place, but this doesn't mean that if you send us a project, we'll send you the authorization 2 days after. It's just not happening at the moment because this is really a process that takes time. We've seen the scrutiny of the voluntary market this year, so it's something that we, I mean, as a whole should get right, and so. Yeah, that's kind of what driving us and the ambition of projects. But it's a critical point that you're mentioning, and we hope to see scale coming as fast as possible. Whether this requires further clarity before being able to scale, or whether this can be done in parallel, is, I think, a national question. Do you want to come back on that?
Hello, this is Frédéric Lebrun with South Pole. I have a question regarding Article 6.4 and all the other independent standards that exist in the market. We know that independent standards and carbon credits from those can also be used towards users that are governed by Article 6. There's a lot of focus on 6.4 and a lot of expectations from this COP, obviously, around Article 6.4. How do you see that space shake out over the next few years as different carbon standards aim to provide credits for Article 6 users?
Luis, then Anna.
Yeah, well, I will tell the policy side and you the market side. Yeah, actually, we're trying to think on how the different types of standards can be compatible, no, and try to understand also the consequences on the accountings, no, for the NDCs of using different types of methodologies, no, because we found there are some difference even between the different methodologies, but between what we are accounting at the project level and at the country level, no. So maybe this is the first appreciation. The second one is that we think that things are converging also, because the private sector is doing a huge effort, no, to adapt, no, and to consider the UNFCCC decisions, no, to align with the Paris agreements. No, we have seen different standards having been working on the methodologies, on the registries, no, and all the structure needed, no, to align the private standards to the Paris Agreement, no. So I think this is the twofold, no, from the convention side or from the policy side, no. We think that we should need to address this consistency between the different methodologies and how they impact, no, on the corresponding adjustments that countries may be applying, now based on the type of activities and even the types of methodologies that they will be authorizing for different types of uses, no? So we think this is like twofold, no? This conversion. And it takes time because it's very technical. Each methodology is very specific, no? Even there are many revisions on the same methodologies, but we think that things are converging and improving, no, to be able to accommodate, no, the private sectors and the government's concerns.
Hannah.
No, thanks. And I'll just add on that and say, I think we would agree that there is, let's say, convergence coming, but convergence doesn't necessarily mean unification. What it means is a standardization and a kind of shared language or benchmark for how the world operates. So when we think about Article 6, we kind of think about it as this unifying factor, but in reality, we will continue to have many different registries for many different reasons. Quite frankly, because they're specialists in things that won't always necessarily be housed within the UNFCCC. So if we look at registries like Vera, they've really, pioneered and excelled in the nature-based side of the markets. Plan Vivo is really pioneering on the biodiversity side. We see, plastic credits. We see, I was hearing this morning about adaptation credits. So there will be a myriad of registries that are really focusing on their scientific specialities. I think the important thing is this unification under Article 6, that double counting is managed, that the methodologies are able to be harmonized in some way, not just in terms of what they're delivering, but equally what that means for the sovereign level.
Great. Two questions here at the front.
In the meanwhile, we are here. Also, the 6.2 new draft text was released. So if anyone wants to read it, you're welcome.
Hi, thank you very much. So this is Huang Yue from IATA. I'm just happy to hear Anna just mentioned the most immediate demand from the carbon market. market is the CORSIA will be kicking off next year. And as a matter of fact, the offsetting requirements will be kicking off January 1st from 2024. And in order for airlines to purchase all those what so-called CORSIA eligible emission units, we need to have the national attestation to say, hey, first it's authorized to use of sectors outside NDC, and then to ensure the host country is properly adjusted those credits from their NDCs to ensure no double claiming in that sense. So my question is, given that the clock is ticking and then in operation terms, from the negotiators' perspective, when can we expect those authorization letter to be ready and airlines can be safely procure all those carbon credits for their CORSIA compliance? Thanks a lot.
Who wants to take this? Hannah?
I'll take it. So I won't speak, let's say, from the policy and the implementation side, but I do think an important thing is there are natural lags in these markets. While, let's say, the clock begins ticking from January 1, in truth, your cure periods are far more extended. So that said, are we speaking to companies in Singapore who are very concerned if they will be able to have credits that are eligible because they actually have export license? Absolutely. CORSIA arguably has a bit more grace because you have a few years, but even then, we're hearing from a lot of airlines saying, I do not want to be accruing this obligation. I want to have surety of supply. I want to make sure that I'm complying with valid eligible units. So I think the operationalization is an entirely different topic. And again, very, very much down on the host country level, as much as is the discussions here in these next few weeks. But in reality, your cure periods give you a slight buffer so that it's not necessarily Jan 1 and done.
I just want to ensure the airlines have the full discretion to do their best strategic manage, right? So that's also what I would say.
Lisa?
Just briefly, the answer is at a national level for certain, but I think the timing can be accelerated quite significantly by what happens this week and next. No pressure.
I can very happily say I am in the hands of the parties.
Hi, Tim Reutemann from Climate Gains. We're a Swiss developer operating under the scheme setup. I wanted to first address price and what Maria said, that we expect prices to be very high. And it must be more valuable than anything else in the market. However, what we are actually seeing is nobody knows how high. And it's extremely difficult to secure an actual emission reductions purchase agreement as buyers try to cost price and we are trying to value price. And at the moment, there's basically no supply and only demand. So it's very speculative to a degree. And that circumstance is hardened by being very conservative. So under the Swiss scheme, you get approximately 1/3 of the credits that you would get under the gold standard for double counted credits. So the environmental integrity is very high, but the price is therefore also at least 3 times higher because 3 times 1, a lot less credits. And maybe just to share one key insight from going through the process with Switzerland and Ghana in our case, design of these projects really starts with implementation. So the first thing you do is build the thing you want to credit for, because only once you've built your first installation, you can start consulting your stakeholders and you can start convincing the governments that you're actually capable of delivering. So our current stage is we have 1 prototype, 5 pilot installations, and looking for 994 more to get financed. So if you want to unlock that, we are happy to speak.
Okay. No question. Maybe here.
I have a question related to the recommendations on methodologies and removals. So given that there is this feeling of the rush needed to come to the implementation and so the approval of this recommendation, my question is the following. Supposing those recommendations are approved as is or with small changes in the following weeks, what are the safeguards in case there is something that has been overseen or something that shall be corrected, but there is no occasion here now, and we want to go into implementation in the following months and years? So what is currently the process to review this methodology, if it's some sort of hard date that is set there, or some sort of timeline, or it will be brought up in a later stage, and thus it can take a lot of time to review those.
Sorry, can you introduce yourself?
Oh yeah, I'm Vladislav Malashevsky from the Ukrainian party Overflow. I'm working with Yango.
Maybe one from Maria as an SB member.
Thank you. So, as mentioned, the Article 6.2 text is currently circulating, so you see me on my phone because I'm already receiving extremely angered messages from all parties that their options were not reflected accurately. Yes, so, yeah, Luis is sitting next to me and I'm getting texts, but... So when it comes to the mechanism things, if anyone has had the interest to watch the many, many hours of supervisory body work, and then to be patient enough to stay online as we go to closed sessions where we fight it out and then we go back to open in the most civilized manner, of course. But the trouble and the trick is that we're trying to create something that is robust enough to withstand environmental integrity checks. We want it to work towards the achievement of the Paris Agreement. We need it to have like conservative baselines. We need the safeguards to be there, but we need this to work for all the parties to Paris Agreement, so all 190 plus countries that each have their own national arrangements, that each have their own priorities in terms of what they may or may not be authorizing for participation in the 6.4 mechanism. And it is extremely difficult to do that. It's also extremely difficult, quite honestly, to have a recommendation for all activities involving removals with absolutely no differentiation on activity type, because the monitoring period that you may set out for a removal activity that is tech-based in geological reservoirs is very different than the monitoring period that you would set out for forestation projects or nature-based solutions, and that's very different in terms of what you would deem as like temporary storage versus long-term storage. And then one, just to show some of the complexities or the maze that we find ourselves in, there is an element of the document of the recommendations that says planned versus unplanned reversals, and we'll elaborate as a supervisory body and get back to you on what exactly that means. And that's not because the supervisory body is careless in terms of the safeguards that it's putting in place. On the contrary, it's because we got into a conversation of how would you differentiate planned versus unplanned? And what if it's a deliberate reversal, but it's still a reversal that you need to make up for? And how do you make it so if you are putting in place a nature-based project for like forestation projects, for example, you are not essentially making the host party use that land for that project forever without having the national authority to repurpose the land at a later point if they need to for example, food security issues, right? It becomes extremely complicated, and I, for one, got lost in the darkness for a little bit because there is no easy way to define these things. And there is no easy way to say, this is what is a planned one, and if this is the way that you're doing it, we're pulling from the buffer pool, for example. Because the buffer pool is something that everyone is contributing to, projects from everywhere. So if it's planned, and the project participant knows that it's going to be doing this, are they allowed to pull from a pool that is being contributed to by everyone? Or do they need to find alternative ways to compensate for that planned reversal in a way that does not harm the other project participants' ability to access those credits, right? These are all conversations that we have had for hours and hours and hours. We had 6 meetings of the supervisory body this year. I don't think any other constituted body has had that many meetings. The official scheduled time for work is from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. I guarantee you, my human rights were not respected in the times that were allocated for work. Goes against like 16-hour days, 18-hour days, having conversations about what to do to make sure that this works, that this is robust, that we are not doing something that hurts the environment, but we are also doing something that the private sector can actually use, and that they will not be looking at from the side of their eye and going, it's easier for me to go with existing processes that don't take Paris into consideration. Because that is an option that still exists in the market, right? And that's what we don't want. So how do we attract them enough to venture into the maze that is Article 6 and the Article 6.4 mechanism, but also make sure that everything withstands the tests of time and the environmental integrity tests and all of the safeguards. And I do want to say the safeguards are extremely important, and they all live within the Sustainable Development Tool. Even though we were asked to come back with safeguards. And the reason why we put them in the Sustainable Development Tool very specifically is because we did not want to create duplicative processes that are extremely hard for the private sector to engage with. And we didn't want to have 100 documents essentially saying the same thing, but in different ways, that the private sector will then have to go and read, or not even the private sector, but the policy people will have to go and then read and compare to make sure that there is consistency across the entirety of the text. And so we said, instead of doing the same thing over and over and over again, just a little bit differently, because we need to cater to all of these different expectations, why don't we just do it in the most practical and efficient way possible and put it all in the Sustainable Development Tool, where you can see it all in one place and use it as a tool to look at the safeguards that you have, to look at the risks. There's a bunch of risk management elements of the tool, and for anybody who has an opinion about how that should be done, your opinion is more than welcome. The Sustainable Development Tool is currently under open consultations for stakeholders to give us feedback on it. And so we've pushed it as far as we can this year. It's open. Please write to us. I personally read every single one, the 300 plus that came in for removals. I mean, for anyone who participated, thank you, but also, I mean, mercy. So looking forward to the ones that come in for the Sustainable Development Tool, honestly, but there's not much we can do for guidance that is this general at this point in time. We need to go to activity specific, and in order to do that, we need to get over this hump.
Thanks. Okay, one more question at the back and one at the front here.
My name is Brad Rockland with Running Tide. We're an organization working on ocean-based carbon removal. We've seen a lot of leadership in the private sector recently on catalyzing new solutions, ocean-based solutions, enhanced weathering, direct air capture, a range of new innovative biomass-based storage solutions. With that has come methodology fragmentation, go-to-market fragmentation, and a lot of changes to some of the traditional ways that these projects are being brought online purely in the private sector. Curious if any of you have strong perspectives on what the process may look like for projects that are essentially coming to market for the first time in new categories as Article 6 is coming online at the same time.
We'll take one in front. Ooh.
Hi, I'm a reporter at Carbon Pulse. I think my question is more simple. It's to you, Maria and Luis. I'm just asking whether your countries are exploring trade Article 6.2 trading agreements. Thank you.
Okay, so maybe I'll comment on the new projects coming to market. I'd recommend you come to Article 6.4 directly once it becomes operational and just avoid the headaches. Please don't take this as a judgment to the activity types and the examples that you just mentioned. Absolutely no judgment at all from my end. They have to meet all of the eligibility requirements and the safeguards and the math requirements that will be agreed eventually, either this year or at a later date. And so if you do it through the 6.4 mechanism, it will be Article 6 compliant instead of doing it through other ways and then trying to make it Article 6 compliant. So that's my 2 cents on that. With regard to your question, if our country is exploring Article 6 cooperation, the answer is yes, we are looking into it, but the priority is first and foremost our ability to achieve our current NDCs and also to maintain our ability to increase our ambition for the next NDC cycle and actually be able to still achieve that without getting into a cooperative approach that may be able to help us out in this NDC cycle, but will significantly hinder our ability to achieve our goals in the next one. And we're taking it extremely seriously. So as of now, we are still looking into it and studying it.
Luis?
Yeah, short answer. I cannot be more in agreement with Maria than what she already has said. So we are exactly in the same line. We are also exploring, but for sure we are trying to understand how we are going to achieve our goals now before moving into real implementation of 6.2. No, and I think it's our cases, but I think there's it's also the cases of other countries. No, that's why I was saying on this pushback. It's not that it's not a willingness to engage on this type of cooperation, but they need to have time not to understand better how we are going to achieve our goals and what we can actually authorize under these cooperation approaches.
Lisa?
Just going to address the first question in relation to enhanced ocean alkalinity. Certainly, in the current guidance, the recommendations on removals under 6.4, there's a very significant chance that could fall on a negative emission technology side of those removals. So I would watch that space very carefully and what happens to the language here in relation to the removals recommendation of the supervisory body.
Felix, you want to? No. So we have time for one very quick question. Quick round of questions. So two quick questions next to each other there.
Yes, so per the UNFCCC Article 6 pipeline website, right now there's only 6 buying countries versus 65 host countries in Article 6.2. What do you tell your negotiation colleagues from the EU and US? They seem not really interested in participating and starting to buy in Article 6.2. I guess also Saudi Arabia is not. Simon Pfluger from Climate and Company.
Okay, and lady here.
But my question is not that quick, but I'll try to address. My name is Aygul. I'm from. I came as a part of Kazakhstan delegate, but previously I worked at the company Blue Carbon Dubai. So my question is regarding the operationalization of Article 6.2 in terms of, let's say, recently Kazakhstan signed an MOU with Japan on GCM. So how we can develop this project so it can comply with Article 6.2 processes. So the answer is pretty correct. There is a process of compliance, let's say the National Carbon Registry, correspondent adjustments, having these institutional arrangements. But at the same time, looking at the examples of other countries like Suriname, they also issued the ITMOs, but I'm not sure about the compliance with these processes. So at the end, answering to my question, I think that it depends on just countries between themselves, how they name these emission reductions as ITMOs, and maybe sometimes without even compliance with the whole process of Article 6.2 operationalization. So am I correct in my thoughts?
Okay, who wants? Suraj, you want to?
Andrea, we have 1 minute.
1 minute to answer 2 questions.
I will answer the second one quickly.
Yeah.
I think for us as Macquarie, we get a lot of proposals like that. And like I said, most of the time we would look at the Article 6 rulebook, and if it is not aligned with that, or if it is not aligned with the CROA Code of Best Practice of a carbon unit, I mean, I wouldn't really go to the second level of assessing it. We'll be really careful on that. That's my personal opinion and what we are doing. For the first question, I'm happy to share.
Anyone who wants to react to that?
I'll give a very quick one and save the three on the other side of the stage. I think, to be honest, anyone that's familiar with the VCM is familiar with what is kind of the mitigation hierarchy. And the fact is, the mitigation hierarchy is first set out your in-house plan. How are you going to decarbonize? For a sovereign, that looks, not just like necessarily infrastructure investment, but it also looks like domestic ETS, domestic regulation, domestic policy. It's only after you create kind of your in-house plan that generally you are able to progress beyond, let's say, outside your borders or outside your value chain. So I think in this instance, and I'm going to speak on behalf of a few parties here, but I think it's much more about how do we meet initial targets in-house, and then you're actually able to go outside. But I think net zero is a progressive thing, and that's not just true for, let's say, how we're going to achieve now to 2050, but equally how both the public sector and the private sector will engage with market mechanisms to be able to actually achieve that.
Okay, we really have to close, so I have my closing question to the panelists, whoever wants to take it. When will the Article 6 negotiations really end, if ever?
I have an answer to that.
Maria.
I think that Article 6 are very good at making sure that they have job security as negotiators.
This comes from a negotiator. Okay, thank you very much to all the panelists, and thanks for your attention. It's been great.